قنينا خيخ وي التكت يوهان يا أختو يكي وش إن خاستي يا خانة يا أوه كيركه تشكتين دقيت أيا وتسا أخ يا أكي شكلنيك تلين ويتلقخ أخو أغانتوتلقخ يبدو ساقط يوه أداتي تختتن يشكلنيك ونخصيا كخنخ لتزين هخوخ تان تلقان ديسلين وتسكو هستو آيخ ستي أيا يا قانخ تيدي قا أخو أتاكو أنيدي قل قانخ أدي كوكتان سو جاك أوي جتليخي يهسبوتين يا يدتقو وشتخس يا صدق جان أوي جايك جينكي جشوكو خاستي يلناخ ستي هخوسكو قل شيدهيني قو يلناخ ستي قانخ أدي دخ أيا هس يا صدق دي شيطان يا شكخ أدي قانخ تيدي تاوك أنيدي أتلين قاج أدي تلينيدي كيكس أدي هخوسكو قو يتاوكوي أدي قاو شغاسي جلتكت يدخ قلتكت يدي أداتي تختتان قو أجوي وان قنينز خو أخ يسقا كشاس أوس كوكو دخسا التكتس دو شكون وان قنينز يأوخ وأخ كش أيخ أتي وجاقود ناخ ستي داد يوخ أدتلآتي يوي أداتي تختتان قو واسقا إيقخ تلتو واساقخ تسكو يا Tlingit nach ستي داد قل Tlingit قينخ أيا هيل واساق قوتي أجوي جهاتو واسقو أيا نخ أيا وتسكو أداد كش أنققختو أوي ويلنجت قستي أجوي يشكلنيك أوي كلخ نخ يكي أوه وكش أدخ إيشيق أوي وأدك تو أدي وان قنينز أخ يدكي هستو إنك أخوانيك خسكو قلبي أوسكي هيخت أيا ودزتين قاتو واسقو كي ودزنوغو يا أخ يدكي هستو تواسقو تسو أوسك أخ تواسقو جو يا أخ آيخ ستي أخ تواسقو قنخوي خستيني هستو إنك أخوانيك قا إلي كشا توا أشكو قوة وتلتشوني أجوي كش أخ إيشيق يا هيخت سين خه داسا وتستين هيخوسكو قوة قلتلق تانقا وانقنين خوستين كتين قل ويشكشني قدزتيتسو كليديهين ويقا يا أوه وتو قلنا ناشكشنيكي كليديهين أوه ويقا هو أوه وتسكا قل شيدهين يقو يوسقا كوك دي يجنني وتسكاي قاتاك كنخ أياك وشاخ كش هستو خيط أوز قوة وانا نيسوي قوة قنخ دو إيد يا نوها وش يا نشخ أوقخاي أتقا أو قوشي أو ستين كتين وش قاق أو إيقا Akawa akawe atwugud. With Tleich akahak away tuwáa. Tlidzi koa kendi aya yendakaiti. Akawe do eat with the she. Guk kakak. Achnaku. Adachwugud. One nisawe ayawe hit klein ausatin. Awa yidachawe awa ach. Ha! Qatliye khatati. Nelka. Akawe we shawat. Tlige. Ye awe do inak akawanik. Ya hati yanakatawe achuch. Hati yanakata chuch to tuwásagu eusatini. Akawe we gao. Kone with kadats kone daku satan. Aka you on kawa a. Ha ya do achuch. Kudzati adawe do chuch. Aka awe ka. Ya kliat ke awa. Kak ziak awa achiti de she. Ajoy ideka kwatashi. Khosaku. Shach aya ejiye wuti. Ajoy atcha ejideye kakwati. Ye awe. Kone aya. Das awat seko. Do ekten katugush. Eko genki atcha. Ta usk. Aka awe we gwell tu deye ausane. Akach ayatsu khwash. Ye ayawsaka. Yisatin just chayeko genki awe atcha. Kashnel igu deko achtuwasagul te kat yech. Yan yeseneil te kat we atcha. Akach aya achtuwasagu yesenei khwash. Aka konach. Juya just atcha te kat yech kakakuchak. Ye awe huchi ai do in hasakawanik kakak hasati tziaka ya ha iti dishi ajoy ich dishi itzu adat you took the time joya we de kinash kashniki we kakak shawati yat ayachaya hastush kashniki we tlokhtsu the Tlingit ani kach ayakustian ishkalnik kheka ko hasu wahin qanachtidi wutusakóowu has to hit yich aya gas akaye wutian ka one kanins has to at wutus yewe wutusakóowu ak ishkalnik kakaden ayashkautlanik chukatin wasayi tuwuchu
Ak kagane ach in akawanik dusayi we kagak shawat fluid kudu jige shanak we old woman, she's not curious tekak enach because she knows already what's going to happen.
ya wutusakóowu yel khakia shkalnik ye awe we shawat our nude we qitqa yel qa we qitqa tukh aya wasatu sak yesh kakwa yesh ku no like yesh qawdu like yesh qawdu aka awe we token Konea kakwa ye awe do ish Gantutl'úk'x owe hu. Achaway di tuwáa Q'allitsini atakach chutzati du dachchan. Akawa away. Yauch dugu. Ka kuch dugu. Ka stakat at. Klelade. We klay nach shawat chutzati hasu ani. Liu at kawajigi shanak. Ye awe. Dequchu away. Ye ausaka. Guk. Ho away to incarnate haku. Ho away ausaku wasa at kukwane. Ya itachkan. Du tuwasaku qanashkidek sati. Achaway. We Tlingit sigóo wutusakóowu at. Tlingit tuwáa. Wasa wutusakóowu at. Khun hewa. Du tuwasaku akach. Ye kukwasti. Achaway we sigóo. Du tlantayiri ausane. Taqa away yel chutzati we takach. Yashkashnik wutusaku yel tliltuwa ushku. Wujidi dana qawuch uste. Just qanashkidek adat YouTube the ton. Yewe we yel.
Yatki yehas yausaka we Gantutl'úk'x we shatk tlúq in tlich shatkatsku tlich yadich tlich tledushu talk satin shatk satin Achwe tlich tlushugu Achwe ish kede kunis ach Itla kede tu kunis ach Shakde has ausakudasa tlich yisaku Tlingit ya at gagane tlich Gantutl'úk'x usti. We're not worms, eh? Achwe Tlingit city. Achwe Tlingit yach ye kununuk. Behave like a person. Tlich isla sinhek dasa ye da ine. Tlagas awe. Kunok tlagas dasa ye da ine wishat.
Yewa ek we hichiyach kwal wutusaku we tluk talk aya haska kwaltik hetwasa o teko a talk ite yatsin zu haska kwatsin yewa ye awek we shad ko ishandain tuwati we tluk dat yat atsu wan qanins ha'i wudutletu washwe atkatu addi yisatin hasti qusti away kelkadain wutusaku wan qanins tuwasagu hasti iti dishinu chet wan qanins hetwasa oti wan qanins klek koa just kleklitua ushku innately ye haswati ka chu yat ayach aya iqayach kleklitua ushku shilsin has in. Ye awe keyishi kleidehin du inuch achtetanen. Zisk aqa has our shloon. Hukadu du chuch. Aqa has our satin de yikt awe. Wait, Speak, aya, kagosh kleich speak yadi. At what did the kuch at gosh has to gate aya yaw the goo. Has the hunt aya haswa at klesh wood na. Has the sake yesu. Ye awa wuch in gwash you has couch at. Gwash has to eat to the she. Yat a yacha, Kesh has to toash good chagut, at what did the kuchu at has to kanach ayaw kuchu. De yach de has our hood. Ye awa has to eat with the she. Aka away, where zisk has our shun ye de has wakuch. Ye away, one kanins zisk ka. Ye kuwat has to eka ayat ye kawti. Wake out koa. Has at. Aka away wake out. Da has at. Dech zisk. Ha! Shekuzi. Huch Klech our Klehuj. Chaguta just kliye wuti with the hun. Good, wait, that's so. Yat that's so our jack. Chanakawanik. Gosh achaway waits eek. Has to eat with the she. Akaha e day has with the she, so. Ye away Tlingit to the tani. Kelch ayachuti, ha waits eek. Next day. Gach to sanuk. Aka to eat with the she ha yat kiyach. Yat atsu. Wish katlink with to satin. Tlingit away wa Kelchuts. Kelchicht. Keltluk. Achoy Tlingit yach kudna nuk. Ye awa hakusti yake. Guksa ye wutien. Masa wutusakóowu. Yatluk. Guksa uwate. Wutusakóowu yashkalnik. Yach. Tuwáa wishkalnik. Has uwahin koa. Tilkat. Kahinya. We ache kutzati. Has ausakutsu. Kich. Okaya kanak. Ho away. Du tuye wuti. We klekwashi. Klekwashi. Yewe dati tuchtatan. Guksa ye wutien. Chak age. Gwash kanach adich haswusatien. Akasanya. Gwashe. Akanach aya haswushagasan. Chak. Kanach koa. Gwash yak ayati. Kanach yudusago at. Nach. Kluknach. Kanach. Tsiknach. Gleidkachinach koa. Fjord. Kanach. Gwash. Stuka chatati. Kayati. Kanach adi. Aka away. وقي ونخ ته قدتي قنخ تي أدي أقاوي قنخ تي دي يأوى تان أدي هسوت لقازن تاك قنخ خوا هس تاك آن أدي هسوت لقازن ياك أجوي تاك أنيدي أقاوي ناكيدي هسوت لقاز هخواسكوا سأتوني قوا قنخ وي وشتخس يو صدق آتلين يلناخ ستي قوتتي تيل هين أدي شيني دي يوه تلك نخكو شا أكا آيا يهاوتين أجوي تشقوي دي خس هاوستين Gantutl'úk'x wegao. Yag tan kasanya. Atlin yelnach sati Aka away. Naki de. Kaj adi. Atlin Ye away gwashjilqati haswutien qanachtidi. Aka ishka hit the dach aya haswullagas nakide. A joeqa nachtedi, marshlake gadaye haswutien. Ishka hit koa hastusai away datwe ishka hit tan ya ishki tan. We anashahash to in yuk auch the tanense. A joe wishka sneak. A tuwáa dach aya. Klein at a dati tuchtatan. Ach tuwáa sigóo de kata yetki has sigóo. Wasa wushjin tulshat aya hakusti yitin. Chak away. Sjayegu genki awe nach sati dat koa hashi yedehin. Wushdach yaw sidak koa. Yel nach sati De shu hit. Ye awe gwall an qallaqu awe daqte haswullagazen. Aqa awe qaqte de shitan qudzati wegao. Helkeden khwasakuqa. Atlen quu hastu inyuk achtetan. Achtwasaku khwasaku. Ajawek hayatki hastu idegachtullatu. Gudach sawel de kat uhan. One qanins. Chu yacha ach. Shikas away jakut nach sati dat yuchidetani. Kashachtuashku hastu shkalnik ishkak kwalnik. Achtuasku koa de katuhan wutusakóowu. Gudach saway yel de Tlingit nach sati. Jak nach sati kwal jakutiki khaqouch. Dasatsu we dasa ituwasagu yisakóowu. Aqa telkadin yishaguk.
Khatsu. Kunach dleit dakusitan yatak. Achwe kunach dleit yan hachwin. Achwe dech dachin yagi dleit hachwin. Atchoe Tlingit washin tuwáa. Wutusakóowu masak Tlingit. Atchoe we Gantutl'úk'x washin Yesu ach garaj yi. Ach tuwáa wutusakóowu masaya washin Tlingit. Ach yit du jidet kach detan ka ye dayach ach eat edishi gwalf seganen ach yidi dek chwagut
Yak itcha ye anascha. Khone hiti de naku tsu. Khatsu ach tuwáa ye awe ya ye gi adat ye tuchtatan. Wutusakóowu a de ye dusne ye we uski washin. Uski washin kechasakó. Ye awe washisaku yis hit wutuwáa. We ka aya du hiti a du ji ye wutiin. Khan akawanik. Ya Chagudach gleit choini washin ach jiwu. Tuagesaku. Yake. Gleit chodach yadash. Aka awe tlayeye wuti anakhugut. Ye awe ach jiwu kakwa ach awe. Ya kone aya kakwajuhu. Tlechwasaku. Gal tlek 100 would do chech at kutzati ka levers tsu shtakat yech hechwasaku asa at kakone an just ach ya tlek achasatin ya kadutich at kachwatich aka uchganihin just kone aya atachutluq ha tla tlechach tuwáa tlechta sachwasaku adat ha ye awa Galchish adu satsu. Dasa yisakóowu. Ye dutsuni.
Wadle gees yat aya I kushaguk. Tjedzika atgani natur Tlingit yuchatangi gugent. Tlech ach tuwáa Wutusakóowu ye yanaka tlech asat. I'll paste it in the chat.
Sheesh. Okay. Ade yuchaytani. Galchish. Ja, ito agesago yanach ach shui Tlingit chenach. Okay. Ade satsu.
Gantutl'úk'x ach tuwáa we shinkit on seen could be seen we hit let's see, where is it? We're very close together in the village. Sa ish Teach or Quach, Nach, Hit, tuwáa, how close all the houses were to each other. So close a worm could go between them. And I, tuwáa, be able to see the story in my mind. And so details like that are tuwáa.
Yeah. Ka Audgan, Hotuaya, Yukatangi. Ye away. The Katuhan Hatuasaku, Wutusakóowu, Tlingit. A day aya with the 2 year. Ka a day akaya akatuakchi. Ye away. Ya Skatnik. Hechwasaku, Chak. Gwash. Which the cutway Jishugu nach sati which in husati and has to hitki. What clash una slay ak. What 8 cashing get hit plain. Duck cashing get what clash Jishugu a kinoe kugian. Which away way ask clank aya 8 ka. Haji Utian. We duck gwash, we duck cashing get Hechasaku, dark ass away, has our Shechen has to hitki. Wutusakóowu eight cashing get slach. Well, Naki Tlingit ani. Klesh Koldach Haji Utian, a Joe duck. Ye away gwash has to hitki. Has to tuwáa, wush to 1K wutian. Aka away, gwash yata yach. Yewe, Chanakawanik. Day sleen a dart. Gadu yan ye di hitki. Way do ducklowe di hitki. Way do kokatan hitki. Ishkitan hitki. Day shitan hitki. Ye away, wuch in aya has to hitki a Goshwe echt. Wash hasu. Wutusakóowu ye awecho ach. Ya yudat. Ka shawat. Wash chaguta kustian koa. Ka kudzati yudat. One kanins. We klesh wuch to 1 koa has to hitki. Ye awe wash. We an shui. We echt. Ka hasu. Yewe a dati tuchtatan. Datich so we hakusti each ark. We take a hit a train kuu one kanins a ye has kuwa uwan. Wuchin. We an yetki. We in at a has wutian. Has nache Aka away, yadu hit kuku. Kanashkidek. Ka gun a daye haswutian. Guch. Ye away, Tlingit kusti, chak. Yet ukha. Wasa shageye wutian. Achu wish katnik. The tla age wush the tla gwalchus sa echi. Hilkadein chosaka. Akoa. Wasa aus chanen aya. Aus chanen awe we kluk. De kusachan in awe kunnach ke uawat. Kustin kluk yachati. A joe ye awe tsuchoach. Wash at aya awat we you kawa'a. Achoe wasa llage kawasa llitsin. Weku'u has ausaku. Atkatai. Wu layakutzatil de katyech. Ha, kesh ulchin ayaha ani. Achoe has to tuwasaku hasawa jaki. De awa achtuj.
Go chat
Ah,
Katina discuss nigi kadain hawak shiyik ye amsinian dujin ye khoji chakatin skashnik tich sitien ku dujin nach tsu
de awa. Tuwáa ha inju de tan.
Hi, ha ina kawanik dushkatlnigi do walk and do set. So team do jin so ayakawe shkatlnik sati awe chukatin.
Yawa. Tlingit shawe do ineji yunayan. Wutusakóowu. Gantutl'úk'x de yach. Yawa tsu adati tuchtatan. Da uskik akhawe. Ausatin ya akshat. Tatke. Talk aya. Achoe gwallio llajage. Keu ich akad du khant aya khashi. Khasa adnadain. Atlach aya. Just yata yach at kunach usk. Gwall llaich handed aya du khus kutzati achoe. Achaya akautlachik. Akawe dati tuchtatan. Datiach sa koa. Gwall kunach llagi at yisatin. Ya the cut yet atki to dachaya our tluch. Ye awa achas a kautlachik. A joy wish gashni kutzati. Kaya kutwune a dat we kustin at. Kustin at. Kustin nak. Kustin tluk. Kustin kutzin. A joy tsu aya shkatulnik ya yidat. A dat away. Das hat zu ja yidat.
Golchad
Ah,
just we skalnig adat kunnachach to us sigóo skalnig a joy wujiach ha in alle tu adat wujiach jaskalnig wujiach Tlingit chusti ka Tlingit ani between is chusika.
ach again.
Gwelly. Hwt. Gwell tris.
Okay. Gwell adegi ge. So, pechasako. Okay. Chish. Dasatsu.
Chwan llain dasa illa tu. What are you reading?
Oh, okay.
I was looking up some roots. Chataya Chwan llain. Yek erg satini wa tuwáa sigóo wutusakóowu again conjugation of verb yeah. Tuwáa sigóo wutusakóowu. That's what I want to do. Origin of copper. Hunting, a tloon, verbs. 21 pages. Cook. Origin of copper. Shade the handway. A plane cook. Okay. Tuwáa sigóo ye chwasanay. Ishgalnik chone. Dasa de uski chicht. Dasa chwat. Down. Nadak. We atcha.
We atcha. Wait, we kakak.
Oh, kakak.
Kakak. We kleinach ka kakak.
Uski kutzin. Okay.
Eat would be she. Aka away. Shawat was it Shawataya au satin. Itch. We nail. Hit klein a ye wuti. Yeah.
Dasa ishgalnik hit klein.
We shkalnik ayach watu yayagi. The nina. Shkalniki. Atko a dekina.
Yeah, dekinaya.
Dati tuchtatan. Wanach sawe we jushugush kalnik kudzati. Hel just chagut nachsati. Chagut yuchatunk. Yat etsu we yisikuge kats. We shkalnik. Kesh just Tlingit ayu. We sukyak. Hastu haskautlinik. Jushugu at. Our Shah, we hoots.
Alutik? Supiak, alutik.
Yeah, we Hasayashkaut sneaking.
Kinias ach ish kashnik. Tuwáa most of it, but some of it I could, follow along. Gantutl'úk'x, is it wushgasi, shkatnik, all of that was really nice. Gantutl'úk'x.
Okay. Yeah, I just think I know some people don't want us to talk about the clans. Someone's on Problem Corner in Juneau saying people shouldn't talk about the clans. But it's how are we gonna know? I mean, I watch recordings of people talking about it, and they're Wushkitan and talking about Duklawidi, but they're just sort of trying to put the pieces together, that's all we're trying to do here. Is we're not trying to tell anybody where they're from or ruin anybody's life, but I just feel like the information's not well enough understood, like how they are connected. And that's what I think we should get back to. Although I'm gonna make somebody mad.
Klein Gantutl'úk'x.
Okay. Anybody else want to go in Tlingit? We can make the switch and do some studying. We can reflect on what we talked about.
That's true.
Ah,
sigóo tu Tlingit sa iyi. Utchi hasai ask tahini an su kanashki su. Uchuai.
Gantutl'úk'x we Tlingit at chai wasach e. One qanins we utchi we qanach ach e. Ge awa ach tuwáa we gwash we at cha kuqutug plain at hechwasaku wasa do sock spices. Ge awa we kedin hechwasaku Tlingit.
Si Kuna.
Ge awa Klesrach tuwáa kuqa awe utchi a kaye ti. Gwash one kanins ka tuwáa fennel claik. We old bait claik. We dasatsu bay leaf claik. Just we gaat ha kuns. Yechtecha acha onion. Sa echi gwarsak echi. Kahin. Well, just wait. Chowder gate to us a gook. That's a ya khatra a washwe utchi. Khwasatin we kleinach yak dach. A dad you took the ton. Ho wash utchi kunachwe do to us a goo. Dasatsu do to us a goo. Ka tu a dedus ye utchi. Who I at unuk yet ja dat we kuns. Wait cook nachash. Yedat we techa. Sha ukwe hin. Dachadushu when it's chanach. Kachzuk. Yedat we hat chuchu. Akaye nati. Ye awa. Ya Juya Khandane. Ade Khandane yuke watan. Eko ye awa achtuasaku khosaku ade dus iya. Kalkatain khoshaku. Khatka one kanins we achtuasaku akayeti. One kanins qat. Ye awa akhayake. Chast we utchi. Nikea.
Kone. Achuch se. Tlingit washin. Okay.
Yeah, well. Gantutl'úk'x wukecha tsukke.
I'll go.
Oh,
Gantutl'úk'x.
Puha.
Okay. Gantutl'úk'x. Actuasigu yata share. Actuasigu wutusakóowu ade aka kachwa kai ye. Achlis jil acht a kaitsin kawutin. Ega kadan duji ite. We kawut kachwa ka adugu ach jiwu. Tasu ka kawu ka isha. Su ach jiwu. Manak sawe klishye dachwane. Gwalch as uchti ka. Gwalch klish ach tuwáa ushgu klieg hwanu gu. Gwalchwe credit card holder kakwa ak ye dachane. Ye gugenk ajewe gwalch yakwad lak. Klish kwasaku masa duasauk patience, or I don't have patience. Tlingit enach. Ke shich achwa woods ka adaya tu a tank. Chish.
Gantutl'úk'x chatsu hechwasaku we patience. Adat you took watan. Gantutl'úk'x sit itiqi yehawutian. Kautua ak. Just Tlingit chinach aya kutus tien. Yuk. Atlein aye haswutien. Sidia kehinak. Adusatsu. Keyishe. Akewutien. Kechne. Khoinak. Kasech. Kinkaudenik. Shedhi niku koa. Tlingit has aushaguk. Kauhan. Wegao. 2003. Ewutien. Khatqadas chaye gugenki achwasakun. Kautua ak. Just Tlingit chinach. Klap yagi. Jinkat yagi aye haswutien. Wuch in wutu ache. Aqa away. Kautua ak. Ka wudutlitu. Ade away. Kautua chakoye. Ka ade. Kautua kaye. Ye away. Kakwa ak away. We at kachako teen. Aqa away ko koa. Gleit kak enach. Khat koa. Tlingit ach tuwasaku. Walwe ade kadu kaye ye. Ye de kakwa good. Och ayan just Tlingit enach. Kakasla ta outletu. Kakwa ak we kawut teen. Kechwa shaguk koa. Kawut. Ye away. Kasa ye den away ade ye xsene ye. Kakaslat di wakshi ke xsene. Dat yachsa yata. Kelkadeen xsakun sa Tlingit. Hechwasaku dasa khanakawani khatra dasa. Tsuye naka. Satkoyeka aya yechatyosuka. Start over. Yewe. Ajoy xosaku tlesh xoshaguk. We xosatin ko acho nachas ausaku. We take a shawat shan. Lakotach satin. We gwash 1997. Hu away. Wush gate wutu da art. Khana kawanik. Tlakudzi atisaku and kanins hastu ai. Geometric patterns yachiati. Ya kadan awe ade. Du tlakatu GET. Khana kawanik. Kesh akai ayakach shahid. just qone kakhwaqa. Khatqa ach ya qutwune. Ye awechwa ach tsu. Shakshani ki kaya kwal yudu sagan. Jenny Llanat. Nacheen ate. We nacheen. We cook kudzati. Emmons a kaushachit. A kaushachit. Kachyak cook aya. A ka aya kachlatin. Kachlatin. We qaq. Kajit awati. A de aya wudusneye nacheen. Chaltakat we nacheen. Wash we qaq dach aya. We atwusku. Come. Khatwitlet ikega. Nishan. Ye awech ach. A kai aya. A kach aya. A kauduni gwatlin. Chak. Duji yes. We what's that deal saku? Jenny Llanat. Gwatl gen the shani koa. Just the cut at to tundatani dach. Guk. Yek pasane. Shakudzi atowe. Gulchish. Zuk get asatsu.
Gwell ach tuwáa ik ewo ik ach chówús jaskallnig adat dleik chag einach. I didn't really understand like the translation of why they were getting skeptical of the young woman and like kind of what happened after that.
Which line is that? Where is that at? Are they suspicious?
Yeah, let's see. Where's the first one? Oh, I don't have it.
Doxa, Shkalnik.
The Gantutl'úk'x, the woodworm.
99 maybe? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, I guess like maybe it's like the cultural part of it. I wasn't understanding like why what was going on with like her. She was kind of growing up, I guess, and how they put that together.
Well, yeah, so one of the things we were talking about earlier was like, you're not supposed to touch some of these things, and it gets a little confusing for me sometimes, because like kids are always picking up like slugs and earthworms and stuff like that, and I try to get them to just, if they're curious and they want to see them, I'm usually okay with it, but I'll make sure they put them back. You know, they want to like take them home and put them in a little cup or something. And I just, there's two ways I come at that. As one is I'm like, well, you're probably going to kill it. And then two is like, we're supposed to respect everything. And so you need to put it back to where its home is. And what we were talking about earlier is like, where it seems to cross the line is when you bring it home and try to make it you, or you become it, and it tries to crosses those thresholds. And that seems to be where things go okay in Tlingit. And so some of the things, like they're suspicious that she's hiding something. And so she knew she wasn't supposed to bring it home, but she put it in her pocket. And so some of those things are also confusing in some ways, because we're supposed to like respect everything, and we have compassion, which is, I think, at the base of a lot of respect, but you're also not supposed to feel sorry for things in a lot of ways. And so a few classes ago, I was talking about this Cree story I heard where this girl felt really bad because she pulled the beaver trap and there was a beaver dead in there. And she felt sorry for it, so she didn't remove it. But that beaver had given its life to them, and so it ended up causing all the sickness in her family. So for this one, like, we understand that some things just freeze in the winter, like a worm or a frog, and then they thaw out and they're actually fine, right? And so that's where the name Aktatsin comes from. It's a frog that thaws out it's still alive in the little lake. And so she brings it home, and then it becomes kind of her baby. And so I think there's a couple of things that people come back to in this story was, don't hide things from your parents. And then that's where the parents are getting suspicious, because they're like, she's spending a lot of time by herself, she's talking to somebody. And then there's parts of the story that I don't always get, which I also talked about today, which was she nursing this thing or was she just feeding this thing? And I have the feeling it was both. And so maybe Jukatin just sort of alluded to it and then sort of talked around it, which is very common for storytellers to do. It's sort of like there's this other component, which maybe if we all knew each other a lot more, I'd tell you that part too. And there's some other parts of stories like that, like the tree that's actually called the village penis. And there's sometimes it crosses this line where probably a long time ago it wasn't as big a deal, but there was so much shame introduced into Tlingit culture from Puritan origins and stuff that, you know, I had to take a whole section out of House because they had body parts in it, and they didn't want certain body parts in there. And so I was like, okay, fine, you know, but they're just, they don't take them out of the English dictionary, so why would we take them out of ours? But, you know, so that's probably what it comes down to when her breasts are growing, is that she's nursing. And I think the combination of eating so much human food, getting love, and actually being nursed by a woman, and then like she didn't even have a baby yet, but she started nursing, which could physically happen, you know. Those were the things that probably made it become huge. It was a huge worm. And there's different versions of this story where, like, and some of the versions I heard, it's like when it would move around, it would shake the whole village because it made so many holes under the village that everything was unstable.
Yeah, it's interesting. It makes me think, well, because then like the worm wouldn't be able to live in its original habitat anymore after that, probably. It's kind of making me think of like domestication of animals and all that stuff.
I just got a puppy, and my puppy is probably okay.
Yep, puppies are a good exception.
I just try to tell, just gone away, gone Gantutl'úk'x, gone Gantutl'úk'x, that's nice, she'll get it, I think. I think she just says okay, and then she'll just go. And sin, like to hide yourself. That was the other thing. It's like that Tlingit was talking about. It's like if you're hiding with it, then it's probably not the right thing. Which is interesting. Comes back to these other things that we can pull out of these stories, right?
Something I thought was cool in not really like the story, but the carving of like that big woodworm bowl, or even on the pole that's up there, is the I have the toughest time saying it. Gantutl'úk'x. It has hands and feet on the big woodworm bowl, and then on the pass that's here, it's got, well, this one has two heads, but it also has little hands and feet and horns.
Huh.
And then on the bowl, it doesn't have horns. But that's something too, I noticed.
Yeah, I guess my speculation would be the addition of hands and feet is showing that it's somewhere in between the human world and the animal world, which is a lot of these stories, like it's that area in between where once we blur that line, things are going to get out of control. That's what it seems to tell me. So it's like, if you need to help that animal, then help it, which, like, coming back to that mouse woman story, yeah, help it along. But once you sort of try to, you know, you're not a worm and a worm's not a person. And so we got to keep those lines kind of clear, is what all these stories seem to line up for. And so, yeah, it seems to be sort of stuck in between, because even she says, it's my child. That's my child.
That's like we were saying, shakats, something. I remember George Bennett was talking about that too. Like, you don't feel sorry for a dog when it's getting wet outside, because it lives outside, lives there.
Or like, you know, sometimes I'll see these birds just driving around. I'm like, how do you do it? If I took my jacket off and just sat outside for 20 minutes, I'd be done. Yeah, and they're just out there, and it's 20 below and blowing sideways. But yeah.
Tlagas at something that some things are taboo. You don't touch it. You don't do anything about it. And that's what Kakatlot was saying today about things that were tlagas.
Yeah, so there are some things you didn't do, and then there's some things you didn't. There's a whole sort of realm of them, which is really interesting, because we were talking about that in another class today. And like, I tend to sort of not like the word like superstitious or superstition, because I think that word just at the base of it is like what I think is real and what you think is not. And so I kind of don't like that, because with other people, like everybody's got their sets of beliefs, right? And through these common beliefs, we end up developing friendships and relationships and stuff like that. But for Tlagas, it's sort of like, these are things you don't do, or else something bad is going to end up happening. That Jinaha is going to circle around towards you or towards your family or your community. And so this is one example of Tlagas, is trying to bring an animal home and make it into sort of yours. But Tlingit, we had dogs a long time ago. So there's this sort of acceptable realm, but then there's this non-acceptable realm, which is really interesting.
I thought it was really interesting that at the end, the girl was the one who said, I want a potlatch, and she got her way. So, I mean, that was like, okay, that's cool. And then the potlatch, in some ways, almost legitimatized the existence of the worm. And it's interestingly, I don't know, inclusive in a way. It's like, okay, it's acknowledged this thing was alive. This thing was it's as if you killed a person, and we're going to acknowledge it and go through the process that we have for when that happens. And I wonder if that kind of ending is in all of the versions, because to me it seems rather positive, or at least a reasonable resolution. And the woman herself doesn't get killed, which I was glad. So I don't know, it was not completely a dark story. It was mysterious and interesting.
Yeah, so there's a tlekwa, there's a lullaby, which we still know that she made for that worm. And then there's a cry song that the people made as I think a way to sort of, and so it's interesting, because it shows like she did something wrong, and then the community had to do something, but then they took care of her and her feelings. And so they weren't just sort of like, well, you shouldn't have done that, now you got to suffer. But they were, and this is what we also see as well in a lot of the stories, is there is this tremendous compassion, which I was reading some analysis of these Sukpiak stories, and then there was like, this guy's like, well, I don't think they really care about each other. They don't really love each other. But it's just sort of like, what? And then I hear those sort of stereotypes about Tlingits too, like being so tough and they're not supposed to cry and all this other stuff. And I think, no, I mean, look at these stories. There's so much rich content in here that shows how we care about each other and respect each other. So, okay.
Just something about Tlingit. So when I look at Eggleston's at Tlingit, he or she is superstitious. I mean, there's other definitions there too, but what I sent to a couple of people today, and it was coming out of Juan Tlain's story about sacred, was, and it's Chukateen again from 1997 talking, and in English, she said, people used to hold things sacred. And the way she said it long ago, so chatlak, attlgas, and long time ago. So she's using that same word. Dulgas, and they used to hold things sacred, where you get these, I don't know the history, if it's like missionaries coming in and all of a sudden something that's sacred turns into a superstition or a taboo or something. But it was really interesting to me that that was a really powerful, good word that Chukateen was using. And when I look it up here, it kind of means something pretty different, eh?
Yeah, right. Which is sometimes it does get, it's distorted, and so that's why we also have to keep talking through this stuff. Like we were talking earlier this semester about like the kushta, and then it just sort of trended towards like scary stories and stuff, where it's like it's more complicated and nuanced than that. And same with tlingit. And so it's like it's not always taboo. That doesn't, because it could also mean like I'm abstaining from it. Like on the coast, especially like when someone like really close to you passed away, you might say, I'm gonna abstain from eating anything off the beach for a year, just as a sort of, just to show some sort of reverence for what is happening. And so, yeah, I think it's something we got to sort of just keep looking at and talking about. Okay.
There's some like sort of a nuance of that, like on line 9, Chukateen kept using this word on the way de T-E-G. And I asked some elders, that on the way de, and it's as if it's not really tlingit, but if you do it, it's kind of going against something, and there's going to be a result. It's as if you know that it's going to perhaps be a result.
Huh. On the way there. Okay.
I'd like to learn more about that word. I'm going to ask some more.
Okay. Yeah. So if we look at kind of Jeff's notes, like this could show us some more. So like something can be tlingit, and then there's a transitive form of that. So we can add, so tlingit usually just, there's probably an object there, but you would probably only talk about a third person thing. Like, I don't think you could ever say anything like tlingit or tlingit. It probably just wouldn't work. But this one does have, so we see tlingit, that's to respect or observe a custom, refrain from something. And so it's interesting because with Story and Naish, even though they did such good work in the verb dictionary, they do tend to lean things towards Christianity. So as great as they were, they did refrain from putting any poop, pee, sex verbs in there. And then they also, if they had chances, would nudge things to be towards like Lent or something like, which is fine because it does fit. And I wouldn't say they totally like scrubbed things, because there's lots of phrases in the verb dictionary about ich, which a lot of religious people at the time were actively trying to condemn or get us ashamed of them. And so here's another, like, I'm always suspicious. I'm a bit of a, I don't know, I guess will they have QAnon? Maybe I'll be like QAnon or something. I'm always suspicious that there's these things that Tlingit gave us long time ago to try and keep us from being ourselves. And so I try to always find, like, where's the line here between what's something that is from Tlingit and something that might be keeping us from being ourselves. And so part of it is like, don't ever talk about those things. Don't ever talk about the clans. Don't ever talk about the ich. Don't ever talk about, and I want to be respectful of people and their fears and the things that they did here. But I also want to acknowledge that there's people who actively tried to just shut the whole thing down. And the way you shut it down is you make it this really foreign thing, the language, the culture, various aspects of it. And so because of that, I tend to get yukujik, right? I get curious about it. And then I want to just explore and figure out how those things worked. And if people talked about them a long time ago, how did they talk about them so that there was knowledge? Because if you ask me right now, whether we're talking about clans or whether we're talking about this other information, I just think the level of knowledge is just so low. If you look at across the Tlingit nation and the neighbors who live here with us, it's just tiny kind right now, and it's got to be more common knowledge. And so that's why there's certain boundaries that I'll sometimes push up against and say, well, actually, if we don't do this, we're going to lose so much. And so it's a difficult thing to sort of navigate, because sometimes people will kind of come at me for doing this stuff, and sometimes directly and sometimes a roundabout way. And it's fine. Like, everybody should have their opinions. But
if I just thought of it, I think of censoring. If you look at the old art, all our old art, they don't shy away from sensitive body parts. So that might be an argument for if folks try to censor you again with body parts, or anybody, just look me up and shoot me an email and I'll send you tons of old artworks where, like, you know, it's there. It's beautifully done. Our art is gorgeous, but you know, it's there.
yeah, right. Like, they're going to do, what's his name? Baronoff. Like, they're going to redo that Kutia in Sitka. And someone's like, put some clothes on him. They're like, he didn't pay yet. So yeah, it's just carve the slough. Yeah, and those things, and so like this, and it comes back too with like place names and the body parts, and it's kind of matter of fact in Tlingit. So yeah, okay.
That's weird. That's weird because Michelangelo does the same thing, and it's great art.
Yeah, right. They're not going to make that rated R. They're just going to put it on the cover of movies and everything. So good point.
One,
Ah,
I read a story today. I was down in my office downtown, and I have a story to tell by Francis Krauss, but Dr. Bambi Krauss is the one that illustrated it, and then somebody else wrote it. It was a pretty beautiful story about kik, and it had some parts, and I was really interested to see what they were saying about the removal of the totem poles, and then talking about bringing in the great big one. And I liked how she put it in there. It was really delicate, you know, about it at that time, and the missionaries were in there, and they just said that they thought they were worshiping poles, so they destroyed them all. And that's where my grandmother comes from there, my great-grandmother. And in my family, they just, you know what you're talking about. It was a lot of a lot of Tlingit, everything was, even the language. So, you know, I like the way that she put things and how she was explaining stuff in English. It's a pretty cool book. Just saying.
Yeah, and there's complicated cycles of history, like missionaries encouraging people and sometimes doing it themselves to remove the totem poles, driving the silver stake into town, and sort of like kind of collectively condemning Tlingit culture, but everybody having to sort of sign those papers in the 1920s saying that you would also condemn your own culture as an individual. And then kind of it just goes on, and then like it sort of resurfaces in the late 90s, early 2000s with the church that was encouraging people to burn their regalia. And one of the things that I think is difficult is these are unresolved things, because I don't see these entities stepping up and saying, sorry about that, how can we help, right? You know, and so sometimes I think about that, like where's the future programs that are funded by some of these churches, and some of them were great, like what Story and Nash did. It gave us so much. There's so much that we still have specifically because of them. And I think they were a bit of an anomaly because they were non-judgmental, I think, in a lot of ways. They certainly had their maybe boundaries that they might not be willing to cross. But just in terms of like the depth of what they did, especially in their time, it's irreplaceable in terms of just the value. I always go back into the Yellow Dictionary and I'll find things and just pull stuff out of there, and then also see how they were thinking about it. And we did have a chance to talk to them and thank them for the work that they did, and they talked to us a bit about what they were trying to do. So Kushik, okay,
Ise Yukatangi. I was just going to say too, those ladies were so young when they came to Southeast Alaska. The first time they'd been out of England, and they just jumped on different ships to come to Angoon.
Yeah, and
how brave! And they didn't know each other until they met on to go on the trip.
Wow. And they learned Tlingit. They could speak it at that time. They couldn't. They said they couldn't at the time we talked to them. But I did ask about Da. Nakashan knew the answer.
Oh, cool.
A high tone Da right before a command is very similar to Kwan when you include it in the command, which just softens the command.
Yeah, that's kind of what Shirley was kind of implying, I think.
Yeah.
Cool. Goodness, geez.
I want to know what Tlingit in a British accent sounds like.
Yeah. Well, they wouldn't talk to us. When we talked to them, they were quite elderly, right? Rene?
Yeah, that was the first thing they said, is don't ask us anything about Tlingit or to speak Tlingit because it's been too long, we don't know.
And they had been traveling around doing other languages.
Yeah. And so it's a complicated relationship, but for us, like we put the pieces together as best we can. And anyways, appreciate you all and your patience and your persistence. It was really fun today. Wednesday, let's look at picking up that verb lesson again, just that sort of intro to verbs, where we're just sort of looking at these three sort of like command, imperfective, perfective, and future. And then we'll look at that for a bit, and we'll probably start going through our stories and seeing how we're doing on translations. And we can start talking about too, like, what do you guys want to do for final projects? You know, like, I'm not too worried about it because advanced Tlingit is all about just continuing to build on what you what you know. And the most important thing for me at this point is probably us doing our best to talk when it's time to talk. So Wednesday, we'll also think about what we can do on the following Monday, so we could just stay in the language and keep talking. It's good stuff, everybody. Good cheesh.
Nay, could I say something to Kutlak?
Ah.
Kutlak. I talked to Kakatlat, Kashkek, Patuk, Kashkek, and we asked Kakatlat about that dog because that was her family.
Right.
And she said because he asked before, it was kind of a soft reprimand. He didn't take his hat off, so they're going to ask him again. It's not rude, it's just a small reprimand. It seems like maybe it meant that they'd asked him once and he hadn't done it, so they did it again.
Yeah, it's kind of like the girl puppet was talking to the boy puppet like he was a child. Yet still a little bit polite.
I forgot to tell you that, or maybe the girls told you and I wasn't there.
No, I hadn't heard that part. Goodness, chisha kananigi. Yak eoxetine too. You atangi too. Ach daya kushusigay. Ach cook. Kayati.
Okay. Anything else? Last questions or thoughts?
Well, I could add something about talking about clans. One time I recorded Dr. Soboleff and Walter Ramos up in the Bill Ray Center at some other meeting. I think that meeting of yours that took for SHI about evaluation. But anyway, so the camera had a 42-minute cassette, video camera. So that ran out. They did their talking, and then I put another cassette in. And after about 20 minutes, probably George looked up and he said, "Is the camera running?" You know how you always put black tape on that red part. Anyway, I said yes, and he said, "Well, we're talking about other clans, and so you can't record that." And so they were trying to figure things out, you know, but they didn't want a record of it. But they were talking about other clans. I mean, those two men, you know.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, you know, and it's something we'll have to keep trying to figure out. And what is it going into the future? Because there's certainly this way that things were, and who are we to change it? I don't know. But I know one of the things that changed is we go from almost everybody speaking Tlingit to less than 1% of the people speaking Tlingit, and it becomes this sort of a bit of a crisis in some ways. And so, but for me, I'm really interested in it, especially how they're related to each other, and just trying to speculate and not trying to tell people about their business, but also just to say, let's make this stuff a little bit more commonly known. Because I feel like if we go back to when those two were little boys, the level of knowledge about this stuff was probably so much higher, like all the way across the population. And so it just becomes this sort of interesting thing, especially like if it's really sensitive, then let's just not translate it, but let's just talk about it. Once we're, because, you know, they probably knew that people were going to work on it and translate it and put the English up there. And so there just might be these times, like there's probably a future, I hope, where there is sort of a clan conference, and then part of it is just entirely in Tlingit, not translated, so that there could be this bit of an internal feeling just in terms of like, this is stuff that isn't for the whole world, and it's for the Tlingit speaking community, which, you know, which is good. I think they do that stuff in Hawaii. It's sort of like, yeah, this isn't for everybody, it's for us, you know. Oh, and we also talked about, I forgot, starting a song, starting a class with a song, and then also trying to do like a brain break halfway through, which maybe you guys have to help me remember. We watched a talk by Michael Yellowbird, who really talked about mindfulness and the certain activities and things like singing and exercise, and how those can really help your mind when you're decolonizing, and also when you're learning an indigenous language. So we'll start Wednesday with the language chant. I'm going to tell you guys, I think what we'll do is I'm going to play a recording of the Pico in Hawaii. I think that part, I won't record that part. I'll just share it with you at the beginning of class, just because I didn't ask them if I could share it with people. Maybe I'll ask them, I'll see what they think. And then I'll talk about that in Tlingit, and then we'll do the language chant, and then we'll move into some lessons. Just so we could start maybe having a bit more of a ceremonial purpose when we kind of start our class. And then also we'll have, we'll think of other things that we can do just to make sure everybody's doing a variety of different things, like specific patterns we're looking for in terms of really trying to internalize some of this stuff.
We're gonna prime the Tlingit pump, huh?
Yeah, and that was Chalk. That was her idea. Good idea. Okay, Gulchish, wutusakóowu, nastigik.
Washaki Kate Yadi Delsige.
I should have. Deosi would be such a good name. If anybody gets a really big dog, you gotta name it Deosi. If you don't know that story, George Davis told me about a guy who lived across the street from him. Old man, spoke Tlingit, named his dog Dempsey for some reason, but couldn't say it, so he'd say Deosi. And then he'd take him outside and he'd say, Deosi, ashish, Deosi, ashish. Because he didn't want to, he's an old guy. He wanted to just do your business and then let's get back inside.
I usually tell mine, hurry up.
Another good dog name is tuwáa, which is a marble, like a little round marble. Usk.
He's got a marble on the top of his head. Oh, he's a week old.
Oh, really? Yes.
Yeah. That plate, yes. Has skustini. Can't blind. Skustini. So, yay.
Squeaky toy.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I've got squeaky toys here. Siaken.
Okay. Wutusakóowu, Gantutl'úk'x.
Wutusakóowu, Gantutl'úk'x.
Gantutl'úk'x.